Hey, you guys, it's fund drive time again at the Institute. Help me pay my writers. The Institute is awesome. You don't need convincing by me. You just need the address. libertarianinstitute.org/donate. Check out all the great kickbacks, including our latest book, Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler. We've got $10,000 in matching funds, so you can double your support without even trying. And William Van Wagenen's Syria book is almost done, too. It's so good, just you wait. But it does take resources to edit and publish these books, so your help is greatly appreciated. I'm working on Provoked every day, I promise. libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thanks, y'all.
All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show.
Okay, you guys, on the line, I have Steve Baker from The Blaze. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Scott, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Very happy to have you here. So on July the 13th, some kook tried to shoot Donald Trump in the head, and boy, did he almost do it. And it's the kind of thing that seems pretty obvious on his face and yet also extremely mysterious, too. And I was watching the YouTubes there, and I saw you explaining your in-depth investigation of what is going on here and what went on there. And I believe that you even said that you were able to, I don't know if you said FOIA or not, but get your hands on a lot of public records before a gag order was issued and the clampdown, which would have prevented a lot of other journalists from doing the same. So, and then you just knew all about what was going on, the division between the authority, between the Secret Service and the local cops and all the rest. So yeah. I was just wondering if you could I could just give you the floor and help fill us in. What do you think is with the story with the kid, the story with the cops? How could this have possibly happened, Steve?
Well, let me start by maybe correcting the record a little bit here. We didn't have time in the first 12 to 16 hours to do any FOIA requests or to get our hands on any documents. What we were really fortunate to do through our Blaze network is we were able to have contacts that were on the ground. I mean, with the actual law enforcement, including Secret Service. And then the gag came down the next morning hard, came right from Mayorkas's office, the director of the Department of Homeland Security. And he basically told the Secret Service agents that were on the ground that day to shut up if they wanted to keep their jobs. And that's exactly what he said.
I see. I misunderstood when you said gag there. I was thinking like it was an official thing, but you just meant he gave them an order to stop leaking. But you got a bunch of information before that. Okay.
But it was official.
I understand.
Yeah, it was as official as it can be. But what ended up happening is we ended up getting a treasure of firsthand witness information coming from not only sources within the Secret Service, but also from other local law enforcement that were on the ground that day before this gag order dropped, that most of what we were able to learn in that first, as I said, 12 to 16 hours has been confirmed by so many other stories, as well as, the press conferences that have finally begun to happen from whether it's been Secret Service or FBI. But most of what we learned was accurate in those early hours. So that's the first thing. The second thing, to your point, is how could this thing happen? Well, look, there's only three possibilities, and you always go to government incompetency first. And as I like to always point out when I'm put in this position to discuss government incompetency, is that when you have the largest government in the world, you're going to get the most incompetency as well from that just the sheer size of the government. But then in addition to that is we have a government that's not just been incompetent by virtue of its, growing and ever, overreaching size, but we have a government now that is corrupt, and it is deliberately corrupt because it is a government that has no desire whatsoever to even pretend to look for the best of the best to head these agencies. And, we always hear when we're talking about Secret Service or FBI or any of these other agencies, we always hear about the DEI hiring standards. And this is absolutely true. It's irrefutable. They don't hide it. It is, all you have to do is look at their X posts, their social media accounts, and you can see that they spend more time recruiting based on color or sexual orientation than they do on the skills and that can be brought to bear for the types of agencies and the types of work that we expect our intelligence services to actually engage in. And so that's what we're up against. So we're looking at competencies, we're looking at absolute corruption, we're looking at lowering standards, our complete lack of standards as it relates to the types of work that they should be doing. So we start with incompetencies. How could it happen? There was layer upon layer upon layer of absolute failures that day, unlike anything we've seen. Second possibility, and a lot of people are going there, is they want to go straight to the conspiracy theory. It was, if it was January 6th, it was Fedsurrection. If it was July 13th, it was, this was a setup or a plot from within, from either the Secret Service or the government or some deep state dark money element to take out President Trump. And so those conspiracies are out there, and we've seen them all. We've seen the videos. We've seen the videos of the guys doing the ballistics analysis and the audio analysis of the bullets. And I think they're up to, Scott, I think they're up to 6 shooters now that some of these conspiracy guys have come up with. Originally there was 2 shooters and then 4. Now one of them is up to 6 different shooters he's allegedly identified. And of course that's nonsense in and of itself. But there's a third possibility, and this is probably where I'm at in my work and my research right now, as well as my partner in this, because at the Blaze, both myself and another of our investigative journalists, Joe Hanneman, were assigned to the assassination attempt case to get to the bottom of this. And both of us are coming to the frightening realization that this was not necessarily an assassination attempt that was arranged and organized by this, elements within our own government, but that what would we call would be the incompetencies were fostered and allowed to happen so that these types of potentialities might occur. Think about that.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's start with just that right there. The Washington Post says that, hey, when they said that it was totally false, that they had denied extra resources to Trump's campaign, the Secret Service, that was wrong. Yeah. And the Washington Post had 4 sources that said actually on numerous occasions the campaign was told, no, we can't do it. So
that's correct.
But now, so your interpretation is the more severe interpretation, which is that, and look, I'm not disputing you or arguing, I'm just trying to facilitate a conversation here, that they left his ass hanging out there because they were sort of hoping somebody would shoot it off.
Well, let's just be perfectly honest about it. I feel exactly the same way about January 6th. Is that January 6th was not necessarily an organized Fedsurrection, but I've always written about it. I always called it a rope-a-dope. It was like, okay, let these guys in. Oh, they got through we've under-deployed our forces on purpose today, because that's exactly what happened. January 6th was supposed to be an all boots on the ground day for the Capitol Police. But instead of having 2,000 uniformed officers on duty that day, they had about 200, right about 200 to 250. That was it. And that was supposed to be a double shift, all boots on the ground, First Amendment protest day. The Capitol Police had issued 6 permits on the Capitol property that day for protests on the Capitol property. And yet they did not staff appropriately for that. So it was like, okay, let's see how far they go. All right, let them. They got through one barricade. Let's see if they go through another one. They let them in another one. This is the type of gradual setup until we got them. And the same thing can happen when you're talking about a protective service like this. Is, look, we don't like the guy. There are elements that hate the guy. As a matter of fact, when you look at it, Donald Trump's threat matrix, which, by the way, is supposed to be the most important calculation. Now, yes, the president, which was Biden or is Biden, is going to get the highest level of security from the Secret Service. But they also have to put into their calculations the actual threat matrix of the individual and the types of events they're doing. So in Donald Trump's case, he's not only the most revered guy by half of the country, he is the most despised man by half of the country. Then you add into the threat matrix the type of language that is spoken about him by the media, the negative, I'm talking about the negative language, the type of negative conversations that are had about him on social media that raises his threat matrix up even higher. Then you add to it the reality that he's doing these large 20, 30, 40, 60,000 people events outside rather than, 500 people inside of a small, school, high school gym.
Well, not
or whatever,
to be too redundant about it, Steve, but also he's the former president and he's the front runner for president at the time that this is happening too. So he's not just a TV star who's one of 7 in a primary back in 15 here. We're talking about a former president who ought to have just, I don't know, whatever the degrees are, but maybe 1 degree less protection than the sitting president himself anyway.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, first of all, nobody wants to kill the sitting president because he's on his way out anyway. And they know he's not doing the work of the president anyway. We know he's not the president. So nobody wants to kill him. This has to be in the threat matrix. Jimmy Carter is still receiving, by law, justifiably so, Secret Service protection, but he's in a hospice. Nobody's looking to kill Jimmy Carter. The number one threat matrix protectee by the Secret Service times 10, maybe times 100, is Donald Trump. And yet, not only did he not that day have the protection that he needed by virtue of the correct types of calculations that a real security agency would be providing for him, it was, in fact, denied. Requests were denied. Very, very lackadaisical preparations in advance and on the ground. They mishandled virtually, I'm telling you, Scott, every single thing that those guys are trained to do, and I'm talking about when I say those guys, the Secret Service, are trained to do from every single division, because the Secret Service aren't just the guys in the dark glasses and the suits that hang around the president. They have uniformed police. They have their counter assault teams, their counter sniper teams. They have their close-in surveillance, their outer surveillance. They have their undercover guys. They have so many different divisions, and every single one of them failed that day. But the most important thing is they just didn't deploy. They didn't give him what he needed. So they had to bring in resources from what is called HSI. So everybody always asks, what is HSI? HSI is Homeland Security Investigations. Yes, we have yet another federal investigative agency. The problem with that is that HSI is referred to by the rest of the IC community, the intelligence community, as the short bus agency.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, okay. There's so many things at issue here, but on that issue, were those the guys in pseudo military fatigues, their paramilitary fatigues, who jumped up on the stage with their rifles? Because I saw someone immediately criticizing that as the absolute opposite of statecraft, that by doing that, they're essentially making themselves targets. If there's still an assassination anywhere, they're now drawing fire toward the president by standing on the damn stage like that. And that sounded like something that like some ATF idiot would do, or some DHS guy who's not really in the bodyguard business.
that was appropriate behavior, regardless of which agency that was. But the HS guys were brought in for surveillance and to do the undercover work in the crowd. The types
the
of guys
local
that
cops
should
now
have identified this shooter.
The local cops are saying that they never even had a meeting face to face with the Secret Service, who told them, "Okay, you guys are responsible for this, that, or the other thing at all." And I saw. I'm sorry, I forget the guy's name. There's a congressman who, I guess, is a former special operations guy who said, "Oh, come on. I mean, you show up at this thing, the first thing you do is you put a guy up on that water tower, never mind the roof."
Right.
And so this is the kind of thing where it's very elementary. So I can see, and I just wanted to make clear, because I'm with you too. If you're jumping, I'll go ahead and go. I don't care. You are essentially jumping to a conclusion from there of how bad this was, to that they must have really deliberately left him more vulnerable on purpose, not just because they suck.
No, well, I'll take you to another story, another aspect of this, and I'll direct your listeners to a story that we wrote. It came out last week on theblaze.com, where we actually proffered the idea that Thomas Crooks was groomed by a government element. Now, we took a big step out to talk about this, but why would we talk about something like that unless we had some pretty good intel on this? And I will tell you that the people that we talk to are the same people that actually train Secret Service counter assault teams and counter sniper teams. These are our most elite retired special operatives of U.S. military. We're talking about more elite than the SEALs, more elite than Delta Force. And these are the guys that train those types of people. And these individuals tell us that they recognize in the behavior of crooks grooming by one of their own, because this is what they do overseas. We're talking to people that specifically working for our own government, ostensibly for God and country, groom disaffected young men in dangerous locations all over the world, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and groom these young men to be ready in case they need them at any one time for a special operation.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I saw an interview that you did where you cited some data that you got from some companies that own the apps on his phone that traced him or someone around to Washington, D.C. So tell that story, and then also explain, was there any reason given for him to go to Washington, or anyone in that household to be in Washington?
Well, all right. First of all, we don't know that he went to Washington, but I'll bring you up to speed on that. So here's what we know from that. Heritage Foundation has a subgroup called the Project, or Oversight Project, and we like to kind of refer to them as the Dark Heritage, because they are the investigative team that goes deeper than typical, political, foundations will get into. And so what they did is they started putting together what is called an ad ID search and track on the phones that were going back and forth between the Crooks family home and then also to the nursing home where Thomas Crook works. So by tracking these ad ID signatures, they were able to identify which phone was in fact Thomas Crooks, because obviously he goes to work at a certain time every day, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. All right, we got him. We know. Now, which one
I'm sorry, Steve, whose app, what app was it, and who was it doing this tracking again now?
This was Heritage Foundation's Oversight Project.
Mm-hmm. And then,
that's who is doing this tracking.
Okay, but I mean, it wasn't a Heritage app on his phone. Did they say which, which data they're getting here?
We all have this. Oh, every single phone, cell phone in America has a unique identifying number.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. Yeah. I guess I had misunderstood that it was some particular, like a private company's app on his phone, and they had gotten the information that way.
No, it's called an ad ID. It's like your phone has a social security number, and so when you use your phone and you go somewhere, you can track somebody from their house to their place of business, and then you can identify. So what they did is they start tracking all of the cell phone identifiers at the actual residence of the Crooks family residence. So in so doing, they're able to track, okay, which one of those phones from the family is going to the nursing home where Thomas Crook was known to be employed. And so by the time you show a consistent and a regular back and forth, okay, that's his phone. So now you can start following him to other places. But you also are interested in how many different people that visit his residence, and then you want to follow to see where they go. So they picked up another unique identifier, another unique ID, ad ID they call it, on a phone that visited both the Crook's home and Thomas Crook's place of employment, but also the same unique identifier visited a location in DC that happens to house has a very significant FBI office footprint. Now, that doesn't mean that phone was visiting the FBI, because there's tons of shops, there's a movie theater in this location, there's a concert arena. It could have been somebody literally just going to a concert there. But in this massive complex in DC, the FBI has 2 or 3 floors in that 11-story building there. So it makes it curious, but it's not a conclusive piece of evidence that he had some connection to the FBI. So what we are doing is, based on that piece of that particular identifier, we've now taken that unique cell phone ID number, given it to another company who's now doing the research to drill down and to actually see. They can tell within basically 3 meters where that phone went to inside that building.
And look, I mean, it sounds bad because of the degree of consequence that almost, took place here. But we could see where the FBI does this all the time, not just CIA doing this in Asia or whatever. The FBI did this in Garland, Texas, at the Muhammad cartoon contest. It was a guy that they were entrapping who got all the way to the front door and shot a security guard before being killed himself. And he had been told by the FBI informant, tear up Texas. That was the last thing he said. And then did the FBI make sure that they were there ready for him? No. They let some local guy get shot and almost killed. And, I think it was the same thing with the guy that had shot up the grocery store in Buffalo, that it turned out that he was on a listserv, or whatever they call it now, an email list or Discord or whatever it was, with a bunch of cops and intelligence agents and stuff who were essentially egging him on. Actually, I shouldn't blab too much about that because I don't really remember the details as much. But
you're on the right track, though, Scott, because here's what, again, we don't like to think about this, but we have to understand that our special forces, including CIA operatives, have developed and have been doing this for decades. They can develop young men. I personally spoke to, in the development of our story on this, an actual operative that told me that during his 30 years in that community, that he could have and be developing anywhere from 8 to 12 young men at a time in different regions of a different country, so that if opportunity ever presented itself, they could activate that individual for a precise delivery of bombs or assassination. And that is what we do. Our government does this. I mean, it shouldn't be a secret to the American people, because look, we've seen it in the movies. Yeah. We see it in the movies. It's not just Hollywood. This is what these guys do.
Well, now it's worth acknowledging too, really, Steve, that it's worth pointing out that, especially if Trump had not turned his head and his brain had been blown right out and he'd dropped dead on the stage in front of everybody in 4K like that our need to have a better explanation than some loser did it for no obvious reason would be much greater, even though the facts would not be changing. Whoever groomed him or not, be in space and time the only truth. But our need for a deeper cause would be much greater. And so in this case, we might even be more willing to let it slide because after all, it just nicked his ear or, this kind of thing. But at the same time, that goes to show, though, that on that same basis, at least, our preference for an explanation shouldn't have anything to do with it. The reality is, as far as our opinions are concerned, he might as well have just been some lone kook who did it because he hates his dad or God knows what, right? Like, I don't know. But it's very worth considering, especially the part about their refusal to really protect him. Someone calling the shot that, no, we don't need to cover that roof. And by the way, before we run out of time here, we still have never been told the name of the actual boss in charge on the scene there that day. Who was telling who to go to what roof, to not go, who called the perimeter, what shape. They still absolutely stonewall all those questions, correct?
That's correct. And look, there's
even the name of the agent in charge.
Yeah, but they're not going to give us the names of agents on the ground for legitimate security concerns. Okay, if you've ever had any interactions with the IC community at any time, that's the one thing they're not going to do. You can get the bureaucrats' names that are just above her. We know that it's a she. They did leak that. They didn't say they or them or Z or Zer or whatever, but they did say she. So we know that the agent in charge that day was a she. But they typically will not give us that name. Now, if she's dismissed from the agency and she's no longer then, an actual employed agent, we may learn what her name is at that point.
Yeah. Well, and now look, I'm sorry to say this, and this is not a racial thing for me or even a sex thing. Because there are plenty of women, and including black and Indian women and whoever, who are badass at whatever their thing is. But I'm just saying, like right now, we have a lady who's fit to run a gas station, maybe, is going to be the president of the United States. Like 50-50 chance anyway. And so is it possible that someone with essentially Kamala Harris's skills was in charge of protecting the president, and she's just basically standing around in her little sport coat, like playing a role like it's a TV show, and doesn't really know what the hell she's doing? Yeah, I mean that's very possible. I don't know.
It's not just possible, Scott. It's highly likely because of the directed hiring standards that have existed since 2009. Because this was, as we know, as promised during the Obama campaign of 2008, that he was going to fundamentally change America. Well, the first thing that he did is he started decapitating the leadership from our intelligence community, from our FBI, CIA, straight down the line, our DOD. He fired almost 200 conservative to conservative leaning generals, replacing those with activists, not necessarily because of their skill on the battlefield, but because of their skill at initiating the changes that he wanted to make to that community. And so to say that a special agent in charge that day, first of all, doesn't even necessarily, we're not even talking about a 20-year veteran. We're talking about somebody that may only have 6-8 years of actual service with the Secret Service under her belt. And she came in during the days of DEI hiring, where that was the emphasis over quality of performance.
Yeah. And look, by the way, I mean, you can see it on the stage where you have these small women who, look, and if you go back, compare it to when Reagan was shot, they did a lousy job protecting him that day too. But all the guys are clearly played ball, at least in college, right? They have a big upper body build because that literally is the job, is being a really big guy in order to, if necessary, push or punch, but also if necessary to block the president from view or from actual rounds coming in. And so if you have a 5'6" girl in a ponytail, I mean, you can see she's on her tippy toes trying to reach up to protect the president. She's doing her job as best she can, but he's a big guy. And so it's just not working, right? You need a guy who obviously is, I mean, that's the job. You know what I mean?
But see Scott, that's probably the most starkly visible example of incompetence that we had all day, other than the fact that they had a rooftop 130 yards from the president uncovered. I mean, that's catastrophic failure.
Yeah. And
right
I saw you mention in another interview that about the radios too, that they truly were, like, you have this information from insiders, they truly were completely siloed. Maybe not even a single point of failure at some command center where they have both radios. Does nobody have both radios?
That is what is supposed to
This
happen.
is 23 years after September 11th, when the cops couldn't tell the firefighters to get out of the building because Rudy Giuliani had abandoned the command center that he stupidly had put at the biggest terrorist target in America at the time.
Well, that is exactly right. And there's infinitely larger number of examples of communications failures, and where you have multiple law enforcement agencies working together on an operation, and because their communications are siloed, which, for those who don't understand what that means, basically you're only able to communicate with somebody else in your own agency. But when that is the case, and that is always the case when you're dealing with mixing local and federal, because federal radios are digitally encrypted and they're purposefully siloed, especially those who protect important people, VIPs. You don't want your communications being overheard or caught, on a public radio ban. Whereas local cops, as you know, you can buy police radio and listen to your local cops' radio traffic. And so they are federal comms are purposely siloed. And so when that happens, it is standard operating procedure that you cross-pollinate between the command centers. And if you have somebody in a very important observational location or observation post or command center post, you have a representative with the radios of all the pertinent agencies providing protection that day, so that you don't get the problem that we had and we saw manifest itself on July 13th, which is the single most important failure that day, was, besides the fact that the kid even got there. That's another story. But once he's there was a sniper team who had him in their sights 30 seconds or more before he took shot the first round. And they were trying to deconflict. And what that means is they were told that there would be coverage on that roof. And suddenly, 130 yards or so away, they see a man with a rifle on that roof. Now, understand, they were told there would be a counter sniper team on that roof. They see one. He doesn't look like one of us. He's not wearing the right gear. We don't see his spotter. And by the way, they're always in twos. Who is this guy? They're radioing that in, and they can't get confirmation because the comms were siloed.
Yeah. Now, I mean, come on. Me and my friends playing guns in the woods in 5th grade could have figured this problem out. These federal cops need to have their own secure comms, but they also need to be able to talk with the locals. So pass out another set of walkie-talkies. That doesn't mean the locals don't have to be able to hear your private federal conversations, but then you could still hear theirs. Come on, this is stupid.
It is stupid, but this is the level of incompetency that we were dealing with that day, or we were dealing with deliberate incompetence.
You know, it reminds me of Oliver Stone was telling Putin about an anecdote that he asked Fidel Castro, how did you live so long? And he said, I paid all my own security guards myself. And Putin's like, I'm sure my guys do their job well, but Point taken. I think
Yep.
Trump needs to go ahead and hire Eric Prince to do his, or somebody, maybe bad suggestion, somebody to be in charge of his security rather than relying on a government program here.
Well, I think Eric Prince is the perfect. Blackwater never lost a protectee. They had a perfect record.
Yeah, well, they've kind of massacred a few crowds too, so.
Yeah, but their protectees made it.
Yeah, well, those were just expendable Iraqis, not Pennsylvanians. So listen, now what's this about Gab? The guy that runs Gab says he found this guy's account, but there's a conflict about just how right wing or left wing he was on there. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I have no insights into the Gab story whatsoever. I mean, we've obviously looked at it. I've not interviewed the founder of Gab in this. I will tell you that anybody who has ever been on Gab knows that of all the more right-leaning social media sites, there's a very, very high percentage of anti-Semitic, racist elements that populate Gab. I used to have a Gab account, and I left Gab for that very reason, for just being a social. That doesn't mean because there's an anti-Semitic account on X that everybody on X is anti-Semitic. You know what I'm saying? But there just seemed to be a high percentage, too high for my comfort level on Gab. But point being is that it would not surprise me that some element of that attracted him, but it also doesn't surprise me either that there would be somebody on there specifically as, to kind of muckrake a little bit, to shit post or whatever you want to call it, his own anti-Trump views on that site. There's plenty of people on Gab doing that. Plenty of people on True Social doing that.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, coming up this October 7th through the 11th, join Miguel Thorup, host of the Expat Money podcast, the heroic Ron Paul, the great Tom Woods, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, myself, and many other great speakers for the online Expat Money Summit 2024. My presentation will be on the subject of my new book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, which is not quite out yet. And learn how you can reclaim your freedom by moving abroad, legally reduce your tax bill, and protect your assets. More than 8,000 people attended last year, and it's free. My guys Kyle Anzalone and Dave DeCamp from the Institute and antiwar.com will be joining a panel discussion as well. Just go to 2024.expatmoneysummit.com for all the info. That's 2024.expatmoneysummit.com. Well, I guess it was just a matter of time. I drank so much coffee I turned into some. Hey guys, check out the Scott Horton Show special blend at MoondosArtisanCoffee.com. It's a blend of organically grown Ethiopian and Sumatran coffee beans. Two very different coffees combined to create a unique blend. Ethiopia is smooth and medium-bodied. Sumatra, rich, heavy-bodied coffee. And it's got caffeine, lots of it, which is good for if you have to drive drunk or get up in the morning. Click through from the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org to save 10% on your order. It's the Scott Horton Show blend from Moondos Artisan Coffee.
Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up.
Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free. And then you'll never have to believe them again. And there are plenty of liberals who vote Republican and, they say, oh, he's a registered Republican, but that just means he voted in the primary. But that could be for lots of reasons.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
I voted
No,
in party primaries before. I certainly was never a member of either party, no
yeah,
matter what
yeah.
the law says about it.
I believe, if my memory serves correct, is that Thomas Crook's mother is a registered Democrat, and his father is actually a registered Libertarian.
Right. So, all right. And then, but it was interesting because I guess the leak was that, oh, he was posting all this right wing stuff. And then, but the editor of Gab, if I have it right, the editor of Gab said, well, he was basically trolling a bunch of Trump people, not being one of them. So,
Yeah, but he did clarify and say that there were hundreds of responses and posts as well that were very anti-Trump.
yeah, right.
So I mean, look, we won't know who this kid is, and people talk about a 20-year-old not having a big social media presence is in and of itself suspicious. Well, I can tell you right now that my children, my daughter is 29, my son is 25. They have incredibly minimal social media presence. They just don't populate it. They have no interest in it whatsoever, which is not uncommon. Not every person, every kid in the world. In fact, my children laugh at me because I live on social media.
Right.
But it's the there's a lot of things that people think are suspicious about Crooks that aren't, but there are a lot of things about his behaviors leading up to that day that lead us to be open to the possibility that he was a groomed element, and that when Trump then suddenly posted a rally date in his backyard, that he was activated.
Yeah. You got any more speculations along that line you want to get into there that I didn't give you a chance to talk about? I mean,
no, because
the incompetence theory is really doing well here today, I think,
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, this is where I get in the most trouble, even, on social media, is because I'm the guy who the first thing that I do is I always seek to dismantle the conspiracy theories. You have to. You're not an honest broker. You're not an honest journalist if the first thing that you do is not try to prove all that wrong. Even try to prove your own preconceptions or your suppositions or your own, kind of doubts and feelings and suspicions. You have to eliminate those first, or you can't do good work. You can't be looking for a specific end target in your investigations. You have to be open to any input whatsoever and go and follow the lead wherever it takes you. And I will tell you that I have been called online 1,000 times 1,000. I've been called a Fed because I will dismantle a single misconception or an internet rumor or a fallacy or piece of disinformation about January 6th. Like, I'll just give you a quick, for instance, Scott. The idea of these magic switch for the magnetic doors at the Capitol on January 6th, and that somebody flipped the switch and opened up all of the magnetic locks, and that allowed people to come in, and that the cops were opening the doors. No, I have spent more time in the Capitol CCTV viewing room looking at that video than any other journalist on the planet. I have more hours logged in that room than any other journalist, period. And I can tell you that I have looked at every single door, every single breach of the Capitol. The cops never one single time opened an exterior door to the protesters. Now, in a couple of places, and we've all seen it with our own eyes, and this is where that thing happens in people's brains that is unexplainable. They've seen cops holding doors open after it was breached, after the magnetic lock was tripped by a protester from the inside, but cops never opened up a single door to that building. I'm telling you, with all authority, never happened. Just me dismantling that misconception online, I have 1,000 people will tell me that I'm a Fed. All right, that was a long diatribe to set up what I'm about to say. even though I went into the July 13th investigations with this same purpose, was to dismantle the emerging conspiracy theories, I can't shake the fact that something is amiss in this one. There's too many incompetencies. There are too many catastrophic failures. It is beyond belief that many law enforcement agencies with that many people on the ground committed that many catastrophic failures.
Yeah. I don't know, man. As we're talking about this, I'm thinking of some of these images I've seen where the people are in, such a, I don't know, panic, but they're extremely excited, telling the cops, over there, and there's more and more footage coming out. And you see the cops are concerned. There's 2 or 3 of them. They're walking around. But they're walking around slowly, and they're walking around too close to the building to be able to see up there, and they're on the wrong side of the building. And there's actually an air conditioner thingy and an electric thingy where if any of them were not big, fat bastards, they could just climb up there. But they don't even consider it because they're like, well, I couldn't just climb up there. I'm not a kid anymore. I weigh 275 pounds. I can't get up there and with all my equipment. So they don't even try to climb up on the roof.
But you see,
and so to me, these are the same cops that if a kid reached to pull up his pants, they would shoot him and go, waistband, right? Because they're not good at what they do any more than any government employees are good at what they do. And they're not in a hurry, right? They know something important is going on, but none of them are saying, oh my God, I'm the star of this movie and now's my chance to swoop into action and save the day and stop the bad guy. None of them are behaving that way. They're kind of waiting for somebody else to do it, which is how people usually behave in those kind of situations, right?
But see, you described a scenario that was a failure long before the fat local cop got to the point of not being able to crawl up the wall.
True.
All right.
True.
Because one of the things that happens in these high profile events is that the advanced teams come in, and what they do is it's called they wedge all access points. So in other words, any access to any roof that is not going to be occupied, that access has to be removed. If there's a permanent ladder on a structure, they literally take plywood and they board up the permanent ladder. If there's a what do you call it? A sewage manhole cover.
Sure.
They weld those shut. They nail doors shut. They close windows. They board them up. Anything that is not going to be occupied by them and by law enforcement, by Secret Service operatives or contractors, are going to be wedged. And that's all done in advance. The fact that roof even had ground access was a failure.
Yeah. And despite, my hyperbole about, they'll shoot some kid for pulling up his pants, which they do all the time, it also does make sense that they just as well might, as you say in the case of the snipers, be calling into their radio, who is that guy over there? Do I have permission to blow his head off or don't I? And nobody knows because nobody's talking, nobody's in charge. Or whoever is in charge that he's asking permission probably doesn't have eyes on anything and doesn't know what's going on at all. Wherever the boss is, she's probably back in a tent somewhere or something, right?
Well, and you brought it up earlier, the failure of the Secret Service not having the morning briefing with all of the agencies. And by the way, there are a lot more agencies than people even realize that were there that day, different police policing groups, so several sheriff's departments, local cops, obviously more than one federal agency. And then, of course, you had the short bus HSI guys out there providing assistance and manpower assistance who had never even worked security events before.
Right.
No experience whatsoever and no briefing. They're just, yeah, you need to be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning.
You know what?
And you're gonna stand around and watch people.
I gotta say, Steve, I mean, I put 100% of the responsibility on the special agent in charge that day, or whatever that's what the FBI calls him, whatever the Secret Service calls the boss on the scene.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
special agent in charge.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about responsibility is it's a quality, not a quantity, so you can divvy it up however you like. And I would also put 95% responsibility on every single deputy sheriff there that day, because any idiot could have the imagination to say, well, somebody ought to be up on that roof and somebody ought to be up on that water tower. And if nobody's doing it, boss, I'm going to go ahead and climb up on that water tower, sir. And right, like somebody's got to lock this thing down, and nobody does it. Yep. And that's the job. You know, you have people standing in the crowd yelling, somebody do their job. Nobody's doing their job, you know?
Well, the bottom line is that it is on the it's on the desk of the special agent in charge from the Secret Service. It is her fault. The failures are ultimately her fault. She is the one that needs to be removed from service. She does not need to be providing security at a convenience store 2 o'clock in the morning and in the safest city in America. This is a catastrophic failure. It is on her. And this is not something that they don't know how to do, Scott. This is something that they've had decades of experience in. They know how to wedge all access points. They know how to keep people from not being where they're supposed to be. They know how to cover rooftops. This is all Secret Service 101 training. And they didn't even get that right on any level.
Yeah.
They messed it all up.
Yep. Yeah, I saw an interview with a local guy who said, Trump came here a year ago or whatever it was, and he spoke at the airport. And he says he and his daughter went there, and the first thing, because of course there's warehouses, right? The hangars are essentially 2 or 3 story buildings, right? All over the place. And he said the first thing he and his daughter noticed was that there were snipers on every single roof. Every single roof had a sniper on it. Even though you might think that, geez, I don't know, one sniper could probably cover 3 roofs. They weren't taking that chance. And that was just a year ago. But now all of a sudden, they just leave him hanging way out in the wind like this.
That's exactly what happened that day. And that's when you have to ask the question, is this government incompetency? It's because let's go there. As I said, you have to go there first. If it is, then what we have learned is that Obama's mandate and his goal and his mission to fundamentally change America by, first of all, replacing competency with DEI hires, because that's what they've done.
Yeah.
And they've done that in all the agencies.
Well, it was Bush. It was Bush who moved Secret Service from Treasury to DHS. And that from the beginning was a problem because they were the big guys at Treasury above ATF. And then at DHS, they're just a bunch of bums along with everybody else.
Well, that's exactly it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this has proven to us, if this was just incompetency, the failure of that initiative. We have to have our best, our brightest, our most skilled, our most talented, regardless of skin color, regardless of race, regardless of sex, at every one of these positions. We have to stop hiring to fill and meet quotas based on some, social cultural Marxism.
Seriously. And look, I don't know. I could see how some people would think, like, I don't know, on some inconsequential job, like why not or something, but on who's your airline pilot or who's the president's bodyguard? Who is the president's bodyguard? You're telling me it's not a guy who played college ball. It's a lady and she's small. Huh? That is, even just that part of it is so crazy. Yeah. It's like a TV show. It couldn't possibly be real.
That's right. I mean, it's not. You're not going to put that girl as an offensive lineman protecting your quarterback in the NFL. It's never going to happen because the only way you get that job is because of your demonstrated excellency from the time you started playing football in elementary school and all the way through the whole system and through college. And you were the best of the best. You were the cream of the crop. That's why you got drafted.
Right. Yeah, and the job is hitting somebody really hard if you have to. Right? That's literally the job. And again, with the Hinckley thing, go back and look at those pictures. The guy that pulls out the Uzi, that's a big guy, That's the job. And the guy who stands in front of Reagan and makes himself wide. Big guy.
Yeah.
That's the job.
And he took a shot in the belly.
Yeah.
That guy took a shot right in the belly.
Yeah.
That is the job, but that's the people that you have to hire. And maybe, look, it's not going to change under this administration. It's not going to change if there is a Harris-Walz administration to follow. But at least maybe people realize that if we don't hire people based on competency first before DEI quotas, that we're not doing the right thing for the country at any level, not just the protection of our president, at any president, Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, doesn't matter. Yeah. We're not getting the job done in our country because of our hiring standards.
And now, as far as this kid, 99% of the time, I can't think of a time really where it wasn't this case. It seems like always when it's an FBI informant that entraps a right-winger or a left-winger or a Muslim into some stupid plot, that's immediately in the paper that, what happened was an informant got a hold of what was going on and then helped make it worse and this and that. And so, especially from the FBI, I don't know, they keep a lot of secrets at the FBI too. They kept a lot of secrets about how innocent they knew Trump was for 3 years during that Russiagate scam and all of that. So they sure can lie their asses off a lot. But I don't know, man. I'll be interested to see if that. Go ahead.
Did you see the report? Yes. Did you see the report yesterday? The FBI put out on social media and everywhere else that they interdicted a plot from a Pakistani citizen with Iranian ties to assassinate a high, valued target here in the United States.
Right. So says an informant and the FBI. Exactly.
Right. Well, this is the big problem with that. Something on the order of 60 to 70% of all of those cases are individuals who did not have the inclination or the resources whatsoever to pull off a plot like that, except that they were recruited overseas, given the idea, I'm open to doing that. Oh, well, here's a plane ticket. Here's some training. Here's what we're going to supply for you when you get there. Yeah, or recruited by FBI informants here. It happens all the time.
Right. Your mom is sick here. Here's $20,000. Say you love Osama in this microphone. And then they give them life in prison.
Suddenly the FBI gets to come out with this story saying, hey, look what we did. I know Secret Service failed, 4 weeks ago, but we just stopped an assassination plot right now. No, you didn't. You created the assassination plot just like you did in Michigan.
Yep.
Against Gretchen Whitmer.
Yep. And you know what? When it's a left-wing, like Earth First, commie, Antifa type, or if it's a right-wing militia guy, or if it's a Muslim, whatever, I always suspect the FBI first. Because they're, just in numbers, they're the ones who do this the most out of anyone, conspire to blow up anything. They're the ones. And so, and almost always it comes out that it's government informants, whether it's, Antifa types, and I think in Colorado that got set up, or obviously like the Gretchen Whitmer scam in Michigan, and as Trevor Aronson has documented, up to 300 or more Muslims entrapped in this way by the FBI, especially in the Bush and Obama years.
No, there's absolutely no doubt about it. And the sourcing that we have on this is absolutely impeccable. It's as reliable as it can be because it's actual agents telling us these stories. That this is what they were put up to do. This is what they did. I just did an hour-long interview on the Blaze. It's on Blaze TV right now. For streaming, anytime with Kyle Seraphin. And when he was hired by the FBI, the first thing that he was put on was, he said 60% of the cases that he was given, dropped in his lap from the beginning, were just tracking American citizens to just learn what they do. They weren't tracking crimes, by the way. He said, you would think I would have been put on tracking people who had committed crimes. No, I was tracking Americans just to learn what they did.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how verified this is. I'm sorry, I'm writing a book right now, so I'm off social media and I'm missing a lot of stuff. But I did hear a thing about that the TSA had some air marshals following Tulsi Gabbard around on the theory of how subversive she is. But she is, I believe, a major in the National Guard right now. So if she's that subversive and an officer in the military, somebody better figure out what the hell's going on over there, when obviously the answer is she's a patriot, and what the hell do they think that they're doing?
Right.
It's insane.
Well, we get stories like this every day. I had one come in this morning. I had a guy that DM'd me this morning, absolutely in a panic, because he has a misdemeanor January 6th charge, but he's now in the National Criminal Database, and he is now being denied commissary access as an honorably discharged service person
on a misdemeanor.
He can't even go to the commissary anymore.
Hey, by the way, Steve, you know what? I've been just terrible about keeping up with the story of the persecution of the January 6th protesters. And I know there were some people there who really rioted and broke some windows. And I don't know if anybody pushed a cop down or what, but I know there's a lot of people who really didn't do anything. Maybe they came in the one entrance where there wasn't even a riot going on. They're on the other side of the building and they still went to jail or even prison for this. But I've really just been terrible about keeping up with that. Could you give us kind of a rundown on that? Is that one of your specialties?
January 6th?
Well, the persecution of the average Joes who got caught up in it, particularly, is what I'm interested in here.
I mean, we're up to almost 1,500 arrests now. We have, it's over 1,000 quote unquote convictions or plea deals. There are still hundreds and hundreds of pending cases. The federal government, the Department of Justice, has the intention of arresting at least another 12 to 1,500 people between now and the expiration of the statute of limitations, which, of course, is January 6th of 26. So they're hard at work. The numbers are up right now. These people, when they tell you that this was a violent insurrection, by the Department of Justice own numbers, and you have to be very careful about the way you read these, they will say that there's been over 530 cases of people arrested for violence against law enforcement that day. That's not true. Department of Justice themselves, even Matthew Graves, the U.S. attorney in D.C. over all January 6 cases, says that only about 225 ne'er-do-wells actually did identifiable violence. The reason why they inflate that number to over 500 is because you were in the area, you were aiding and abetting because you were next to a guy that did violence, or you interfered. So if you interfered with law enforcement, maybe trying to get at somebody who was doing something wrong, and you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, you got an interference charge, and therefore it's a violence charge. And that's how they inflate those numbers. The reality is that 99.998% of the people that went to the Capitol that day did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Some of them walked through an open door. They didn't see barricades because the barricades had been pulled down. The barricades were pulled down on the outer perimeter on the west side before Trump ever even finished the speech down at the Ellipse, a mile and a half away. There were thousands of people that arrived at the Capitol that day that never saw a closed area or do not enter sign, never saw a barricade, never saw a fence. And most of those people, if you were more than 25, 30 yards away, you didn't even know violence was going on because you couldn't see it. The sea of people was so incredible, and depending upon your sight lines. And so suddenly doors are open all over the Capitol, 7 to be exact, and you see hundreds of people flowing in, and you look over at whoever you were there with, your wife, your son, your best friend, and you go, hey, look, Capitol's open. Let's go see the rotunda. You know, I've never been in there before. And that's what happened. And they're charging people with crimes and turning them into, like I call them misdemeanor terrorists, is what they, because that's exactly the way they're being treated.
Even if they were going in there to continue protesting and hope to stop the certification process, that doesn't mean that they were threatening violence or had, as you say, had knowingly crossed any line at all. So they don't have to just be sightseeing. I mean, they're part of a protest. But as you say, there's 7 different doors. And I think most importantly there, on either side of this massive building. So there are some people riding pretty, you know, at a pretty high tempo, and some cops are getting beat up and stuff like this on one side of the building. On the other side of the building, people are just kind of moseying on in. We've seen the footage of it where, and you're the expert, but I believe it's the exact opposite side of the actual Capitol itself. They're coming in and they're staying within the velvet rope line and looking at the pretty paintings and stuff. They don't know where they're going, so they're just kind of following the line, and nobody's rioting whatsoever. They're not even protesting. They're really just milling around looking for, you know, to find out what we're doing kind of thing, you know?
But Scott, there were people that walked inside for 10 minutes, took a couple selfies, didn't parade, didn't chant, didn't sing the Star-Spangled Banner, walked out, went home, and weeks later were swatted by 15 or 20 agents with M4 rifles, red dots on their forehead or on their chest of not only themselves, but their family and their children for misdemeanor charges. In the 100-plus year history of the FBI, before January 6th, the FBI never so much as investigated a misdemeanor charge, much less swatted somebody for a misdemeanor, a nonviolent misdemeanor.
How many people were raided on misdemeanors?
I don't know that number, but it's way more than one. Way more. And we get testimony. We hear about it still happening.
It's still going on. Okay. And then and then some of the people were held, you know, pre-trial in solitary confinement, this kind of thing. Can you describe some of that? Because a lot of times, like we just saw with Julian Assange, the process is the punishment. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, and there's a lot of misinformation about that. There were some serious abuses of due process in the early days of the whole January 6th hysteria, when they first dropped the dragnet and they were arresting people for virtually nothing. They were swatting people. They were swatting journalists and arresting them. 25 agents show up at a journalist, putting the red dots on him and his family. That's all documented. They were putting misdemeanor defendants in jail for 4, 6, 8 months. And then they were also holding people because they were using the excuse of the COVID regime, because when all of this started happening, remember, we were in lockdowns, and in DC, worse than anywhere, just about, were severe COVID regimes at all the federal agencies, including what they refer to as the DC Gulag, the detention center there. And they had a severe COVID regime. And so they were locking these guys up, putting them into solitary confinement because, well, first of all, they were conservative. So you had a high percentage of guys that, were not vaccinated. And so if you were not vaccinated, you were treated much worse. And this is not rumor. This is not suspicion. This was by policy, stated policy. So they would separate and they would isolate and they would put into solitary confinement, which is torture, by the way, because they weren't vaccinated. They weren't allowed to, they weren't given hygiene utensils. They couldn't, these prisoners were having to pass around a single razor to shave or to do any grooming whatsoever, because they weren't given anything if they were not vaccinated.
To protect from germs, that is. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then worst of all, because they weren't vaccinated, they were not even allowed to meet with their lawyers. They couldn't meet with their attorneys in person. They could only get a 15-minute call, which was being recorded and monitored by the feds during those calls. So there was a tremendous amount of abuse. A lot of it, they were using the excuse of the COVID regimes to violate that. But some of those abuses still continue today, not nearly to the level. There's still a lot of people out there that think hundreds of J6 defendants are being held without trial for 3+ years, and that's just not true. There's probably right now between 12 and 15 people being held in pretrial detention that have, and some of those, there's a couple of cases of +2, +3 years that's been going on. But the only reason that it's been that long is because those individuals have been delaying the trial themselves, not because the government has kept them from going to trial. They keep filing motions and doing legal maneuvers. Look, if you're a guy that took a baseball bat to cops, you're probably going to get 7 to 10 years. So delaying your trial for 3.5 years is no big deal because you're going to get time served anyway.
Yeah, better to stay in jail rather than go into the penitentiary for as long as you can.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are reasons for that. But that's not to say that there's not a tremendous, I mean, and literally we're now over 1,000 abuses of the federal government and by the Department of Justice and the FBI in particular to prosecute these cases. It's horrific.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I've kept you long enough. Thank you for the update on all of that stuff. And I do hope that you will stay, unlike the news cycle, that you will stay on the attempted assassination of the president, and especially on the case of if anyone put this kid up to it in any way, who were they and what the hell was going on there? So, and I really appreciate your, careful and journalistic take on controversial type questions. That's just my style. So,
well, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, that is Steve Baker from The Blaze.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.